So let's bring Lisa back. Back you come, Lisa.
Yay, Lisa!
And we'll see what kind of tag team she's got going on for this round. So you're going to talk Barb's talk, right?
Yes.
Okay then, here you go.
So as we mentioned, Barb Stewart, who is the coordinator for the Invasive Species Program, double booked because she happens to be in Mexico. So I said I would do her presentation for her. I've been a director with the society for, I think, close to 4 years now, and I've been working with them for about 7. They've done a ton of amazing work, much like the Stewardship Society. There's an amazing amount of community support, community involvement, and to have been able to watch kind of the changes over the years have been pretty awesome. So, with no further ado, you might notice that our names changed. So last year, when Barb was here, we would have been the Boundary Weed Management Committee. More and more focus and understanding of the importance and the risks associated with aquatic invasives. And in the last year, the directors and the members agreed that we should shift from being a weed management committee to an invasive species society. And one of the reasons why that was important is, although we were partnering with the Stewardship Society in the past on things like aquatics education, it actually wasn't part of our mandate or constitution. So technically we weren't supposed to be, and we couldn't apply for funding for it, so it was limiting. So we've modified our name, changed the name, changed our mandate to include all aquatic invasive species. And with those, we're really focusing on education and outreach and partnerships with other groups. We are working on updating the 5-year strategic plan. So the strategic plan was, I think it expired last year. And now that we have a new mandate, we figured it was a really good time to update and incorporate the new stuff. So what I'm focusing on today is just the work that was done in Area C by the I was about to say Stewardship Society, Species Society, and some of the projects that we have going on as well. It's becoming a tongue twister. Next slide, thank you. Okay, so within the invasive plant strategy, it lays out species for treatment based on threats, risk, and then what our strategy is. So our strategies are eradicate, which means we're going to try and get rid of it, contain, and monitor. Some of the species that we're working on eradication in the Area C is plumeless thistle. So this was first found a couple years ago up above Alpine Pit, and as well as existing sites up Santa Rosa Road. All but one site was treated manually this year, and they are making good progress. There's one site that's on private land with an absentee landowner that there's been trouble getting in touch with the person. So we don't have the right to go on private land and treat without permission. So there is one site that's not getting treated. Mouse ear hawkweed, up until last year, was only known to occur in Kokanee Creek Provincial Park over in Nelson, and then it was found in Christina Lake Provincial Park, so we're pretty sure it was brought by probably a park visitor, just moving from one area to another. It was treated last year, and when they went back and monitored this year, they didn't find any plants, so that's good. We'll likely be monitoring it for another 3 to 5 years just to make sure that it really is eradicated. But it shows how that early detection and that rapid response and getting an infestation when it's small really increases our chances of success with eradication. Next slide. Common teasel is probably one you've maybe noticed. It's grown as a garden ornamental. The tops, those spiky seed heads, look really spectacular in dry flower arrangements. But when it gets out of your garden, it's now an invasive species. So there's one existing site under the bridge over Christina Creek. It's about 5 meters by 5 meters, and that was pulled and dug out this summer. And so far they've been able to keep it from spreading. They haven't eradicated it, but it's contained and they're working towards eradication. So if you see this plant, please do report it, and if you have it in your garden, please do not let it get out. Next. So long spine sambar. This is another new species to the area and a pretty nasty one. So it's a grass, it's an annual grass. You can't really tell what it is until it gets its spiky seed heads, and I wish we had maybe a close-up of the seed heads, but they're like, oh, there's a sample, oh right, there's a sample over there. They're like little mace balls with the spikes all over them. They're nasty. It grows primarily on roadsides, beaches, so those gravelly, open, disturbed soils. And recreation is a huge vector of spread because it sticks. It will stick to your shoelaces, it will stick to your tires of your bicycle, it will stick in the tires of your vehicle, so it spreads really, really easily. And it will also puncture things like bike tires and toes and stuff like that. Okay, next. So the first site was found in September, south of Christina Creek along Highway 3. And then when they started to inventory, they found it further north up on Swanson Road and Sandra Frontage Road. So it was much further distribution than first expected, and it's everywhere that vehicles pull off on the side of the road, those sorts of places. A manual crew of 2 spent 4 days removing the plants from over half an acre. And Jen Haynes was part of that crew, and she was talking about it in the invasive species meeting. She said, you basically go through 1 pair of thick leather gloves a day because the spikes are just so nasty. So you have to pick up each one of those things individually and stick them in the garbage can. I know they've tried vacuuming them, but that doesn't really work. So the advantage of having them on the roadside was that they were really visible, and lots of people stopped and talked to them, became aware of this plant, and hopefully we'll get any more reports. One of the business owners came out to talk to me. He said, oh yeah, I've seen it, I just didn't know what it was. So now he knows, and if he sees any more, they'll let us know. And there was also a news article in the Christina Lake News. So this is definitely a new invader that we want to catch early. It's hard to treat. You can't treat it with herbicide. Basically, manual treatment is your only option. So, if you see this anywhere in Christina Lake, please report it. Next. And I don't think we know where it came from. Probably the Okanagan. They have it in...
There you go, that's a good guess.
Well, they have it in the South Okanagan along some of the winery roads. I know they have it. So it's quite probable that they just brought it with them on their truck tire or car tire and off it dropped when they pulled over. So containment is the strategy that we use for species that are too widespread for us to consider eradication, but where we do have usually fairly successful treatment methods. So we look at how can we manage their population to a certain area and then eradicate everything sort of outside of that. So yellow flag iris is what we would call an emergent plant, so it will grow kind of on the edge of the water, in the water, can dry out. The removal was done in Christina Lake Community Park with some funding from the Parks Foundation this year. It was the 3rd treatment, and it's amazing with yellow flag iris, you have to dig the roots out. It's incredibly labor intensive, but after multiple years of treatment, the effect is phenomenal. So, what did they say? This year, a crew of 4 took only 1 day to remove it, and do you know how many days they used to spend? Days. Like truckloads of this stuff. And now it's down to 1 day, so that's 3 years of treatment. Huge success. So it's a lot of work, but they're containing it and doing a really great job. There was an additional patch found later this year by the Stewardship Society, so that'll get targeted next year. Horiolism, obviously one we're not going to eradicate anytime soon. So this is one we're working on containment, focusing on the transportation networks, so Highway 3, Santa Rosa area, as well as Gilpin grasslands, both the park area and the Forest Service Road. Barb noted that they got quite a few neighbor complaints this year. Without a bylaw, like an unsightly premise bylaw, and then an enforcement component, there's nothing that can be done with complaints unless it's voluntary. So that's something to know. Blue weed is another one that we're working on containment. It's quite widespread on the east side of the lake. Herbicide treatments were done all along Highway 3. So that would have been with Ministry of Transportation. Tech Resources has also started treating their lands, which is really important because that was a major source of seeds and a major infestation. So now that they're treating that will hopefully help. There's still some private lands where people aren't controlling it, but again, nothing we can do about that. Okay, garden escapes. Just like you can't dump your aquarium pets, it's not good to take the plants out of your garden and put them in a ditch. So 3 species, actually there's about 5 plus the teasel, and they're all garden escapes. So cypress spurge, people have probably heard us talk about leafy spurge. So this is in the same family, and it's a garden ornamental. This one they've been treating along Highway 3 south of East Lake Drive. Japanese knotweed, and that's another one. You've probably heard of the knotweed species. It's a lot talked about down in the coast. They don't have any growth at the sites they've been treating in the past. So there's, she doesn't say how many sites, she said there's escaped gardens. It's been treated in previous years. There's been no further growth from those sites, so they are having some success, but they have no idea how many gardens this is growing in, so how many gardens it could be escaping from. Lamium is a ground cover species. It's found off East Lake Drive. The benefit, this one will only grow in shaded areas. So it's not going to get out into our dry open grasslands or out on the roadsides. It'll restrict itself to the shaded areas. But again, we don't know how many people might have this in their garden or how many times it might have been moved along. The blackberry here was a report from a community member. They thought it might be Himalayan blackberry. And it is fantastic to have people even knowing that blackberry might be invasive. Like to have gotten to the point where people are phoning in and saying, wow, I saw this and this might be a problem is great. So we don't think it's Himalayan blackberry, we think it's Allegheny, which I had never heard of before. It's another garden. You plant it in your garden. They figure somebody dumped it in a ditch and now it's growing. And again, they don't know how many sites it might be at. It did get pulled, the site was treated by Ministry of Transportation this year. Sorry, I'm just reading the notes where it is. Shuley Road. That's where this one is. Sorry about having to read my notes, but I don't know all of these. Cutleaf blackberry, so this is another garden escape. It was found at the north end of Christina Lake Community Park. It was about 10 meters across. Took the crews about a half an hour to remove. And again, because it's a garden ornamental, they don't know how many other sites it might be at, but this site at least has been controlled for now. Next. So for the sites that we're not trying to eradicate or contain, there are some species where the target is to monitor. We don't know if they're going to be, how invasive they might be. There's not enough literature or science to say that, yes, this is going to be a major problem, but it's something new to the area. So one of the ones that we're watching is spotted cat's ear. Really common in people's lawns. People recognize this and seen it? So yeah, this is one that they're monitoring. No treatment at this time. It's considered more of a nuisance. It's not provincially listed as a noxious weed or anything. So this is one that we're keeping an eye on. Next. The third one, water lily. So it's the white flowers in the middle of the circle. The rest around it is the water shield that's native. So again, this is one that the Stewardship Society has been watching for several years, noticing increases in some areas. I think it may have been planted by a lakeshore resident. It is really beautiful, you can't deny that, but it also has the potential to spread, to impact our aquatic ecosystems quite heavily. That's it. Creeping Jenny. Yes, and that is it. So it's widespread in the community park. Ron Walker first pointed it out about 10 years ago. It wasn't provincially considered a problem at that time, so they've just been watching it. The target next year is actually to do a pretty solid inventory of it and find out how widespread it is, where it is, and decide on action from that. In the Pacific Northwest, so answer your question 1 second. It's reported to be a problem in riparian areas, so that's one of the concerns is, you know, if it's in a community park and we can manage it, okay, but if it starts to get into our natural riparian areas and choking out some of our other native plants, that would be a real issue.
Just a question that if some of these garden plants are becoming invasive species, obviously they're bought at garden centers. Are they aware, and do they suggest that they advise their clientele?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of work being done with the regional committee, so things like the Boundary Invasive Species Committee, and there's a provincial committee as well. And what they've been targeting is a grow me instead target. So when they have a lot of information about if this is the type of plant you're interested in because of the color or the type of growth or where it will grow, well, this one could be invasive, so why don't we try one of these other plants instead? And sometimes they're native, and sometimes they're non-native, but they're simply not invasive. And I think one of the problems with a lot of the garden plants is we didn't necessarily know they were invasive because they were in people's gardens. It's not until they're out of the garden and not being mowed up against or weed whacked, you know, when they're not being maintained anymore, that's when they can start growing and spreading. So it's an awareness factor, so that is definitely something that's been worked on. And I think they're working on regulations around it as well. Yes. So there's some pamphlets over there. It's called Grow Me Instead. So good question for sure. Early pondweed. Look, there's some real themes coming out today. So I won't say much about that one because you've heard about it. One of the thoughts is this should probably get controlled along with the milfoil just so it doesn't become an issue. We don't want it to get any worse. Okay, flowering rush. This is not here. It's one that we're watching for. It's really hard to identify though. It doesn't always flower. So it's not an easy one to pick out. It just looks like another aquatic grass in the lake. Were you at the training when they found one? Okay. I think Barb was down at a training.
To go look for one.
good, that's fine.
Okay, so it's in the Columbia system, it's in Ponderoy Lake, which means it does, of course, then have the potential. And it's primarily spread on the feet of waterbirds. So here's one where we cannot control the vector. We have absolutely no control over where those birds decide to land. So we'll just have to keep watching for it. It does have a really unique triangular cross-section if you cut the stalk in half. Idaho, it's really difficult to control is what they've found. So again, it's one that we want to catch it early and eradicate it if we can. So on to some of the projects that the Society did this year. Top left-hand corner, so Barb and her staff, Kristen Small and Jen Haynes, they go to a number of the fall fairs. They take these awesome roll-up banners that we have now and sit there at booths and present information. The next one over, Barb went up to a provincial training, and this is at Site C Dam where they've established a mandatory washing station for all vehicles coming in and out of the construction site. So in the north, there's only one knapweed site, and it's at Site C Dam. So could you imagine only one knapweed site? So it's really important, but so it's great to see industry taking that initiative to recognize that they're the ones who can control the spread of this. So that was a wash station up there. Every couple of years they do a ranchers training where they talk about invasive species with our local ranching community. So that's your bottom right corner, Barb doing the ranchers presentation. And then there was funding from the REKV this year to undertake a bit of a new workshop, the Goats Eat Weeds workshop, which I think was pretty interesting and fairly successful. And the takeaway message I got from the society meeting a couple weeks ago was that it's not just about the goats, it's about the herder. The goats will eat weeds, but it's whether or not the herder can appropriately manage the goats to keep them from eating everything else. So, but I think there's some potential there, and it was a really great opportunity to have that.
Timing is everything.
Yeah. Okay, so another project that we've been working on a couple years ago, so there's Boothman Oxbow Provincial Park, which is just east of Grand Forks, which probably a number of you are familiar with. Barb and I with Parks put together an application to look at habitat enhancements. So there's both the oxbow, where the riparian habitats become quite degraded, as well as the upper bench, which has turned into completely agronomic, non-native grasses. So it's a project to, one, convert the upper field back to a native plant community, and two is to help restore the riparian habitats associated with the oxbow. And finally, it's about getting community involvement, I guess, which there's been a ton of. So there's been a number of elementary and high school classes involved with growing grass seed and planting plugs. So there were 5,870 grass plugs and pots planted over this year. Not just by the students, we've also had the Stewardship Societies come out to help. I know Graham came out at one point to help. It's been a huge progression, and it's really neat if you can stop by and take a look. It's easy to get down and walk down. There's still another couple of years of work to be done. I think there's another 5,000 seeds to be planted next year, but it's going. And this was some of the riparian planting. So the black tarp was put down to choke out the reed canary grass, which is growing there. If you try and plant anything in that stuff, it won't live. It will just die out because it'll get shaded out by the reed canary. So you put down the black tarp, so the reed canary grass can't grow. You pot or spike the stakes through that, and hopefully we're going to get some more shrub habitat and a shrub layer around those the oxbows, which would be really great for things like songbirds. And Doug and Jenny came up for that, so big help to you guys. Thanks to you guys. Funders, as always, we don't do these things alone. Lots of support from Phoenix Foundation, our local municipalities, some of the industry stakeholders in the area, and that's it. And this one I actually probably can answer some of the questions for because I actually know more about this stuff. Okay.
Questions for Lisa?
Yes.
I have two questions. One, is the bloom on the fragrant water lily the same as the bloom on the other one that's growing here? Does it look the same like that lotus?
The yellow lily?
No, the yellow lily is totally different, but from the 1994 water quality assessment objectives, we don't know if it was a mistake, we'd have to ground truth it. There was the white water lily and the fragrant water lily identified in the list. But we have to find, and then we'd have to send it to Matthias and see if there is totally two genetic type, different plants there.
Okay, the fragrant one has the bigger leaf, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's split, and it's rounder, yeah.
Yeah, and my other question was, is there any native blackberry around here? Because I was given a blackberry bush, and I've been trying to grow that thing. The winter freezes it, I run the mower over it, that little sucker comes up every year, and I'm kind of proud of it, because it's so brave.
Dave Durant is also here from Durant's Nursery, and he can probably answer that also.
I don't know.
I feel like I should know this, but my answer is I don't think there's a native, a local blackberry.
So is it okay to have a blackberry bush, or are they all?
You know what, it's totally okay to have all of these things in your garden. They just need to stay in your garden.
Okay.
See, it's
Tell
done
that-
some,
Tell that to the birds, though.
Tell that-
Well, I know, that's true, with the seed spread. But a lot of the time when they have spread, it's not because of a bird, it's because people have thrown them. But yeah, so it's fine to have it in your garden. You just keep it controlled, and I mean, it sounds like you're having trouble getting it to grow in the first place.
Yeah.
I have a stupid question. If the lilies cover a large area, what's the milfoil like below them?
I don't know, and then the other thing to say would be they might not grow in the same types of substrates. So milfoil won't necessarily grow everywhere. So there's some places that this might grow that milfoil wouldn't. But I'm not sure, Andy.
Andy or
Yeah,
myself, Andy,
So this is a lot of the coverage area that you'll see in the Sutherland Nature Park. The milfoil does grow with the lily plants, not as thick, and it often doesn't reach the surface and bloom like it would if it wasn't there. So in that way, it does control the milfoil a little bit, but that's not to say that the milfoil isn't there. But the milfoil can literally grow anywhere.
Awesome, thank you.
Chris?
Yes.
One last question. If you have these kinds of plants, invasive, it could become invasive plants in your garden, and you want to get rid of them, what's the appropriate way?
I thought that question might come up. So double bagging and taking it to the dump is one, or you could burn it. That would be another. I'm not sure of any others that come to mind.
They're not good for composting?
Well,
What
it
these things you
depends.
do.
It depends on how they. So if they happen to grow from root fragments and you put it in your compost, those root fragments can grow. If they grow from seed and you get rid of the seed heads and all that's going in there is stock, then that would probably be fine. But so you'd have to understand how they reproduce, because
But the best way
Double bag.
double bag and take it to the dump. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa, again. You can prove this, Christina Lake.